Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. When we think about being safe at work, it's mainly around our physical well-being. So not getting injured on the job or becoming unwell from the work environment. Psychological safety is essentially the mental health equivalent, something more and more businesses are building into their safety offering as the topic of mental health becomes less taboo, whilst also being a $17 billion cost to the Australian economy. Liz Ralph is the learning manager at Lysander, an award-winning leadership consultancy that supports businesses across a variety of industries in shaping leadership development and cultural transformation. She says conditions like behaviours, systems, culture and language can improve and support our mental health, or they can damage it. So, how can you identify poor psychological safety in your workplace and build a robust framework that delivers results for staff and the business? Liz is explaining to me.
The way that we can assess and measure whether we have good psychological safety or poor psychological safety is by identifying and giving a language to psychosocial hazards. So these are the hazards in our workplace that we can identify and assess whether they are destructive to our mental health or supportive to our mental health.
So Liz, what are some of the psychosocial hazards?
Okay, so some are really obvious and visible. So high levels of conflict in our workplace will damage our mental health.
Yeah.
Okay, they'll undermine our psychological safety in that workplace. Things like job control. When we have a high level of job control, it's good for our mental health. It's good for our psychological safety when that reduces the risk of our mental health being undermined or damaged increases. Some are really obvious, like unreasonable job demands, not being adequately trained for the job that we have to do, low recognition and acknowledgement of our work. People, I think, can easily believe or understand that these things might be optional extras in a workplace. You know, that I go to work and I do my thing and I expect everyone else just to do the thing and tick the boxes and do the job, and how we recognise that or how I acknowledge someone's effort, that shouldn't have to matter. But it actually does matter. And so we can have more influence over creating a psychologically safe workplace than we think we can in some cases.
So with that in mind, Liz, what does psychological safety look like when it's good?
When psychological safety is good, we see teams that collaborate and work really well together. And they do that because there are high levels of trust. Diversity of thinking and experience is welcomed and it's included when it's brought to the table. People can feel free to express a concern or ask for help, ask a question, even test the status quo, and they're not going to be attacked, they're not going to be shut down or ignored or belittled. So when we have these sorts of conditions, people work much better. They can be innovative, they can think more creatively, they understand that by speaking out, they're not going to be shut down or ignored. And so the productivity actually increases.
Yeah.
If you look in a workplace, you might not be able to spot these conditions, right?
Yeah.
But if you drill down with employees and you ask them, do you feel safe to speak up if you don't understand something in a meeting? Do you feel safe to disagree with other people in your team without fear of being ignored or shut down or attacked? Do you feel safe and do you feel comfortable asking for extra training? Or do we live in artificial harmony? People are too afraid to speak up. People don't know how to resolve problems and they just get on with it and internalise perhaps, the discomfort or not understanding or feeling unheard. And so workplaces with high levels of psychological safety are more creative, better team cohesion, people are happier and their well-being is supported, and that comes through in the work that they're doing.
It's so interesting because culturally, certainly in the past, the tradition has been for businesses to expect productivity through an almost autocratic top-down approach as opposed to giving employees agency.
And I think that's a really good point that you raise, because I know that undoubtedly for many leaders that can feel quite confronting. There would be, a question around, well, how do I get people to do the job if I'm not like that? That's how they've grown in their role. That's the role modelling they've had, and that's what's got them the results that they need at that time. So what we understand is that it's really important that leaders can build different capabilities and understand what inspirational leadership looks like, transformational leadership, collaborative and participative leadership. These are all styles of leadership that get results without the cost to our mental health, and actually produce results that are very often better. Decision making is better. Innovation is better. And so I think it can be confronting and it can sound really scary for some industries where they have these baked in leadership styles and the cultures and systems that are wrapped around those. But it's really important to understand that this is not about attacking or losing anything. It's about building the right skills and capabilities so that you can be inclusive, be participative in a way that is productive as well. The two are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. So it might sound obvious, but what does a workplace look like when psychological safety is not good?
When it's not good, there's a lot of micromanagement. That's one thing. We will see high levels of conflict that are not well managed. They may occur in short bursts and then be ignored. And there's no resolution. There's no problem solving at the end of that conflict. Really obvious ones would be that bullying and harassment occur and no one calls it out. And potentially people don't always recognise it either. The victims will certainly recognise it. The perpetrators and the witnesses to that may not either, because again, it's culturally baked in. Teams do not collaborate well together. Perhaps we find the more dominant personalities are the decision makers, but they may not have the experience or the insights to be making the best decisions. So people are afraid to speak up. They may sit in artificial harmony because they're too afraid to question something or challenge something. So you'll see teams where people are quite quiet. They're just getting on with it, but there will be mistakes made and covered up. There will be decisions made that don't have the buy-in and the support of teams, but they'll go along and half-heartedly do the job anyway. Data-wise, there'll be high levels of attrition. There'll be potentially bullying and harassment claims. Mental injury claims will be high. If you do an employee engagement survey, you will find the results are poor. Employee engagement is low. Trust in leadership is low. The opportunities for development have been identified as low. And, there is very clear measures that we can take to assess the levels of psychological safety at an organisational level and, of course, at an individual level. High levels of burnout, high levels of anxiety and stress, people self-reporting poor work-life balance. We know that poor mental health costs $17 billion in Australia, cost to the economy. Wow. Now, that's not just a financial cost to a business. That's a community cost. It's a societal cost. These are costs that we can measure in dollars and we measure in the human cost.
Well, Liz, final question. We know that culture setting comes from the top, but what is leadership's role when it comes to creating a psychologically safe space?
Okay, it's a great question. I can't overstate the importance of leadership in creating a psychologically safe workplace. When we take a step back and we look at it from a bird's eye view, psychological safety in the workplace is a workplace responsibility. It's not an individual responsibility. And part of that is the leadership and the management around that workplace. So what leaders can do at the very least is educate themselves around the hazards and the risks to our psychological safety, okay? There's a lot of resources out there that you can educate yourself and understand what are psychosocial hazards. And then you apply them in your workplace and you take a really honest look at where those hazards exist. Then you commit to improving them, to reducing the risks, to addressing the psychosocial hazards. And as a leader or as a leadership team or as an employer in a small business, you make a commitment of resources to improve that safety. Now, that might mean leadership development. It might mean developing a culture strategy that has as its objectives an improved psychological safety, which means doing the tough work of self-awareness. How are we leading? What are the systems and processes in place that we can adjust and change and check to make sure they're not contributing to poor mental health? So there's work to be done. And our baseline can be different depending on the industry we're in. We do a lot of work in the construction and infrastructure industry, and they have a really clear need to improve psychological safety. And the leadership in some of those organisations is highly committed, not just the awareness piece and understanding what the problems are in their industry, but also committing resources, time, money, additional support where they need it to making a difference, and understanding that it's a journey. Just like we did with physical health and safety in our workplaces, this is a journey, and we're right at the beginning of that journey. And that's okay, That is where leaders have the role, really. They are the critical change makers. They might not know how to do that at the beginning of the journey, but they can certainly find the support to help them develop. They will get the results, short-term and long-term.
That was Liz Ralph, Learning Manager at Lysander. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.